Hello friends, welcome back to Doll Art House. Today I'm taking another one of my Goodwill Monster High dolls and I'm turning her into a mermaid. As always, I start by boiling the head to soften the plastic so nothing gets broken when I pull her head off her shoulders. I want my mermaid to have really soft, whimsical hair, so I need to start by removing her existing hair. When all of her hair is gone, I take some acetone and remove her factory paint. I'm starting to blush this doll with some unusual colors. Normally when I'm trying to make a doll look more like a natural skin tone, I try to sort of neutralize the existing color, but since she's a mermaid and I can take a little bit of license, I'm trying to give her some sort of really colorful pearlescent skin tones. So I'm going with yellows and peaches, and I'm not trying to cover up the sort of gray-blue of the underlying doll. Once I feel good with the blushing, I start drawing her face. Now, to be honest, I don't have a concrete plan for how this doll is going to turn out. I just know I want her to feel magical and interesting and a little bit different, maybe even a little bit alien, something that you see her and you know, okay, yeah, this is definitely a magical fairy creature. That being said, as I started drawing her face, I kind of defaulted to some of my standard, I started drawing out eyebrows, I gave her the whites of her eyes, thinking I was going to do, your standard iris, and then the more I got into it, the more I realized I didn't want her to look quite that human. So I started filling her eyes in with kind of a really pale blue, thinking maybe I would do like a larger iris than normal, but the more I started thinking about it, the more I wanted to do something more extreme, almost like shark eyes. So I started to fill in the entire eye with this sort of rich blue color, and then I just worked on deepening it, and it started to take on some really interesting, unusual personality. I also feel like she's looking more and more like a creature of the Fae, which I really like. So as I continued working on her eyes, I started to get a clearer picture of what I wanted to try to do. So I aimed to make her eyes like a really dark, deep blue that also have this sort of glow rising up from inside. So now it's just a matter of building color in, going darker, and then adding more glow, and then adding more shadow, and then adding more glow until it starts to feel like there is really, this light glowing from inside. It's easier to get into the little nooks and crannies if you add some water to the watercolor pencil. For example, with the lips. So here I'm going back to the eyes and adding more highlight, and then going over that and kind of blending it back into the background of the eye. And then putting in some more shadows. So I'm starting to really like the way the eyes are coming out. Now because she's a mermaid, I wanted to do some slightly different things with her face, so I'm giving her kind of white freckles and some other like really distinct highlights that feel almost like something you'd see on a tropical fish. She also gets her eyelights. And then I decided I wanted to give her some small eyebrows just to help with expression, because I feel like she's turning into a sweet doll and I wanted to give her sort of a sweet expression. And it's really helpful to have eyebrows. But again, because she's a fairy creature, I am giving her blue eyebrows. Blue. The eyes just need a few finishing touches. And her face is done. So now it's time to move on to her hair. I got this really nice, super silky white yarn and made some wefts out of it. It's got a really fine silky texture, and I think it's going to be really nice for her. Once again, instead of making a wig cap and then putting the wefts onto it, I am just doing the technique where you put plastic down over the head and then use Mod Podge to glue the wefts to the plastic, and then the Mod Podge and the wefts themselves end up making the wig cap, and it fits really nicely, and I've been really pleased with how they've turned out so far. So that gives you an idea of what she's going to look like. Now to start work on the tail, which is of course the big challenge with this project. So I wanted to make sure that I preserve the articulation in her hips and her knees, because I wanted to be able to pose the tail. And so I decided to use epoxy sculpt to kind of turn her existing legs into her tail. So as I'm going, I'm just making sure that I keep checking that the hips and the knees are bending without being obstructed. One of the things I really like about epoxy sculpt is once you've got the material in roughly the right area, you can use water to help smooth out the edges, and it's a really nice medium to work with. So once the epoxy sculpt is dry, I give it the first coat of paint. So she's going to have a white and gold koi fish tail. So her base coat is this sort of, bluish greenish white color, and then I'm going to give her some sort of reddish orangish spots. And when the whole thing is done, I have this plan, we'll see how it works out. I want to cover the tail in transparent sequins to give it sort of the fish scale look. So once I had her tail painted, I blushed the body, and I'm already thinking about, how am I going to make the fins of the tail, and I am already getting a little bit nervous about the feet because they're just a little bit bulkier than I had anticipated. So as I start to draw the fins out for the tail, I'm trying to figure out if there's a way I can work with the shape that I've already sculpted onto the doll. I know I want sort of big, dramatic fins, and in order to get them to hold their shape, they're going to need a wire frame. And I got this really awesome film that I know I've seen some other folks use for like fairies' wings and stuff. And I believe it's called unicorn skin. I think it's got a couple of different names, but the idea is you shape it around whatever form you're going to use as the frame, and then you heat seal it. And I'm using just a flat iron, and the edges start to stick together, as you'll see in just a moment. And then once you've ironed over the form, you can cut the edges off and use a flame to seal the edges around the wire. This is the first time I'm using this, so I'm gonna say it's probably not as beautiful and perfect as I wish that it had turned out. I learned a couple of important things, one of which is if you want sort of a jagged edge on the bottom, don't do what I initially did, which was try to burn it in. It's going to be a lot easier if you cut before you use fire. So I tried to salvage this side, and I figure, hey, she's a mermaid, she lives in the ocean, maybe she's gotten into a couple of tussles with some other fish. She doesn't need to have perfect fins. But as you'll see, I learned enough after making the first one that the second one turned out quite a bit nicer. So same basic process, wireframe, unicorn skin, and then seal it with heat. And cut the edges off, and then use a flame to seal the edges around the wire. So as you can see here, I've already cut the edges that I want on the bottom of this fin. So I used the flame very delicately to try to articulate those. And I think it came out a lot nicer. But I quickly realized I was not going to be able to make this work with her feet. So I cut the bottom of her feet off, and then figured out I was going to need to drill a hole to put the tail wire into. And once that was sort of secured, I was able to build up with some more epoxy sculpt around the edge of the tail, and this was a much nicer way to sculpt the base of the mermaid's tail. So I'm using some epoxy sculpt to kind of give a little bit more substance to the top edge of the fin. And once it's all dry, I sand it down to make all the rough edges smooth. Now I get to paint her all over again. So as I mix up a new batch of paint for this one, you'll see it's not exactly the right color, so I'm going to correct that in a minute, but it is close enough to get us started. So here I've added a little bit more yellow and white to kind of bring it back more in line with the previous color. And I'm making her spots a little bit more of a deeper orange because I want to make sure they show through the transparent sequins. So this is the real work of this particular doll. She gets lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of individual scales. So these are transparent sequins that I found at a craft shop, and they have the same kind of iridescent kind of shimmer to them that the unicorn skin for her fins did, and I thought, okay, this could be really amazing if you can see the spots through the sequins. But at this point, when I'm putting them on, I wasn't sure how clear you were going to be able to see the dark orange spots through them. But I pressed on anyway, and here you can kind of see I'm trying to overlap the sequins so that they lay like fish scales, one on top of the other. I got into kind of a rhythm, and it actually went a little bit quicker than I had originally feared, so that's good. One of the challenges was figuring out how to get the scales to lie flat against all the curves. So the glue that I'm using here is a special sequin glue, and I'm sure there's plenty of other glues I could have used that would have worked just as well, but I just wanted to make sure that it would dry as clearly as possible. And as the glue starts to dry on the bottom part of the tail, you can kind of see that it's actually turning out better than I'd hoped, where you can see the spots underneath the scales. And even after all the stuff I'm putting on her tail, she's still able to bend her hips and her knees, which is awesome. That's what I was going for. And as a final touch, I have a bunch of little itty bitty teeny tiny sequins that I put on the details of her fin. And this is her finished tail. So I didn't want her to have a really fancy, elaborate outfit. I wanted her to feel like a wild creature that just made do with what she had around. So I found this yarn that reminded me of seaweed, and I used that to embellish a very simple tunic. I also made her some accessories out of coral-colored beads and mother of pearl. And I think she came out pretty nicely. So here she is. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to share them in the comments. See you in the next video!